are some of the reasons why maybe you found it hard to be authentic as a social worker in the past? And is there anything that encouraged you to persevere through that?
For me, I think it goes back to, the research that you were mentioning again around kind of like letting go of what you think you should be and just being. That has been that has been something that has been a bit of a challenge for me, right? So I think for me as a Black transgender person, always like showing up as my authentic self can be challenging sometimes. For me, when I show up as my full self, I have to potentially worry about things like transphobia, homophobia, racism, just like I have to reflect on how these things might impact my experience. And I think for me, worrying about these things sometimes causes me to shrink parts of myself to fit in. So I'm directly doing that thing, as the research mentioned, of like really trying to look more, trying to make the work that I do look more in line with what my white counterparts are doing, with my non-Black counterparts are doing, right? And I think in doing that, that kind of like waters down who I really am. And that doesn't allow like all parts of myself to show up in the work that I do.
Do you have any specific examples about the difference that you can see?
First, I think what I'll touch on is kind of like what has encouraged me to kind of like persevere through that. And I have an example.
Okay.
So I think what's encouraged me to persevere is kind of knowing what can happen in the quote unquote therapeutic relationship between me and folks accessing any services that I'm working at, that I'm volunteering at, that I'm doing, engaging in social work at, right? I think something really magical and really, again, therapeutic and transformational can happen when we do show up as our authentic selves. And a really great example of this is I was working with somebody and this person was Black as well. And they shared many other identities with me. On our last interaction together, they said, "Hey, Noah, seeing you gives me motivation to keep going and to be myself." Right. And, there's a lot of things we can do as social workers in terms of, wellness planning and, just kind of like writing out really concrete and practical plans for folks in moving forward and empowering themselves and supporting themselves. But, me supporting this person and working alongside this person, just being who I am and showing up authentically, and for them to respond like just seeing you and working with you gives me the motivation to keep going. I think that's a really great statement on the importance of authenticity in the work, right? If I were to water down any parts of myself in that interaction with that client, they might not have been, seeing me and seeing who I am, and then knowing that they can also push through some of the things that they're struggling with, given that we're sharing some of those identities, right? There's like a way to be on as a social worker. We can turn on all of our approaches and our theories, and those are good and those ground us, and that's the foundation of the work. But just showing up as yourself, laughing, joking, making light of things, and being professional at the same time, I think can really be helpful. So
I think people can tell, right, when you're trying to be somebody else, you're trying to fit into whatever maybe the therapy is trying to tell you to be instead of
exactly.
being you.
Exactly. And I think for me, coming from a community of color, some of these concepts that we do learn through academia can be very influenced and informed by Western education, by Western norms, by Western society. And so there's nothing wrong with that at all times, but sometimes using those tactics or using those frameworks don't always land well with communities of color, because again, we're approaching it from a Western perspective and standpoint. So, for me as a Black person, I'm going to use those frameworks, but I'm also going to use what I know, what it means for me to be a Black person and interact with other Black folks, and what it might look like for my communities to feel comfortable in a space, and what that might look like, and what kind of things need to be said, and what kind of the tone that needs to kind of like be present. And that kind of like for me exists outside of like theory and frameworks that we might learn in academia for sure.
So we talked about theories. I don't know if you have any specific examples or other examples that are therapeutic approach related for maybe ways that you have felt a little bit of pressure to be something that you're not.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So I can think of many, many experiences, but one that pops up into my head was I was working in an agency, and they had very strict rules around kind of like attending programs. So, folks would have to like come in at a certain time, or like the doors would be locked and you wouldn't be able to access programming, kind of thing. This program was also a program that was encouraging the presence and attendance and fostering a safer space for people of color and Black folks as well, right? Quickly I learned, and this was also a program for young people, and quickly I learned that, young people really enjoyed showing up to the program and coming to the space, but the rule around time and not being able to access the programming if they were to come a certain amount of time after the program started doesn't work, right? I had a lot of conversations with the youth, and they didn't use this language, but basically, time is a colonial concept, right? I was working, a few of these youth that I can think of are newcomers, right? So the way that they approach time and showing up to like leisure or recreation is not how we might experience it here in like Canada or North America, right? 10 minutes late to something is actually not you coming late. Like that's you coming on time, right? And so for me, it was, the balance of respecting the agency's like policies and procedures, but also honoring that these policies and procedures can feel colonial to youth who are coming from a certain place, right? So being a bit flexible, me coming from where I'm coming from, I know concepts around time and coming on time can be challenging for a lot of communities who are coming from a lot of different places. So being cognizant of that and knowledgeable about that and trying to challenge that and push that wherever I can, but also being flexible around rules that exist like that, for sure.